All right. Thank you everyone for joining today. We've got Lori from Ohio. Roxanne is in the webinar today. People still coming on. I want to thank you all for joining our webinar with Grovo. My name is Alex. I'm with Namely All-in-One HR for Humans. Grovo is a micro-learning technology, and we've got two of our respective leaders in learning and development and some great content coming your way. Today's webinar is titled The Future of Data in Learning and Development. And before we move forward, I just want to point out a couple things. One, there is a Q&A section. So throughout the webinar, please feel free to use that Q&A section, and we will do our best to answer those questions live at the end of the webinar. Additionally, for those of you who joined from SHRM, there will be a SHRM certification available at the conclusion of the webinar, but I will warn you, although we are sending the recording out, you have to be live on the webinar to get that SHRM certification. Otherwise, in the recording, it will be removed. So we'll show that about the 45, 50-minute mark, so hang tight with us for those of you folks who are on live. But as I mentioned, it will be recorded, so stay with us. We will send this out as well as the slide deck. Fantastic. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and move forward and point out a couple live events that the Grovo and Namely team are out at across the United States. I'm not going to go over every single title, but you can see that both of us are very active. Namely does a lot of local events, specifically in California, SF, Los Angeles, San Diego, and a big event this summer that we're really excited about here in New York City. So snap a screenshot if you can, get the information. Great way to network as an HR professional, to meet other people in the space. And additionally, you can see on the right-hand side, got a couple webinars as well. So if you like consuming content this way, feel free to join in the future. All right. So what do we have for you today? That's a great question. First, I'm going to jump into a brief introduction about what we will chat about today, how data is going to impact learning and development moving forward. Next, we'll jump into some key HR data metrics. This piece is really interesting to me as a member of the Namely team. Data is a big focus of HR in general, and we are really looking forward to some cool products that we have on that front moving forward. Next, as I mentioned, we've got some great thought leaders here on the webinar today who I'll introduce momentarily, but they're going to touch on some learning and development approaches that you can take in your organization today. A lot of good key takeaways and action items that we'll wrap up after that section. So make sure to listen closely. We will send out the notes after the fact, but hopefully you get some stuff that you can implement in your organization immediately. And as I mentioned before this, we're going to do some Q&A, so stay active in that Q&A. Let us know what you think of the webinar and what you would like further information on. So next, we are going to introduce our speakers. One who I'm sitting right next to and I've worked with many times on webinars. She is the Learning and Development Lead here at Namely. Everybody at the Namely office knows her. Her name is Christy Thurston. Thanks for joining today, Christy.
Happy to be here.
Fantastic. And next, we have Summer Rivers Salomonson, the Chief Learning Officer at Grovo, who I know has tremendous experience in the L&D space and a lot of good stuff for you guys to take away today. So with that, I'm going to jump right in, pass it off to Christy, where she can start chatting about data and HR metrics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Alex. I wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit of, why we're all here. And sorry, I'm just fighting off the end of a cold. One of the really exciting things from my perspective is that learning and development is getting a lot more attention. It's becoming a hot buzzword in HR. So can't be more excited about that. But on the same vein, it can really be difficult to create and then to execute on an effective and continuous strategy in L&D. And this could be due to a lot of different reasons. For example, a lack of employee interest, or a lack of executive buy-in. And so what does that turn into for all of you guys that are listening? Well, a lot of companies are spending thousands of dollars per employee on training programs that they find are underutilized, and that's no fun. So a study that was conducted by CEB actually found that about 70% of employees, they say that they're dissatisfied with growth opportunities at their companies. And what we can turn that into is learning and development opportunities for us to implement in our organizations. But what's really important is that we make sure that we're data driven in doing so. And so when you're looking at, for example, and we'll dive a lot deeper into these things today, if you're implementing a new learning and development program, we'll consider how that ties into training, and then how that ties into performance. If you're thinking about, well, what are my retention rates looking at right now? Well, look at how your demographic patterns might be correlating to this thought of career mobility and into growth. And we'll talk more about that. I'm really excited talk about that later on. So I really can't drive the point home enough that whether you are the person who is tasked with learning and development as a functional owner, or if learning and development initiatives are just part of your, or the rest of everything that you're doing within your organization, you can still use these principles by using data-driven principles to really maximize the outcomes that you have in your learning and development space. So I think what we're doing right now is we're pulling in a live poll. We'd love to hear from you guys to see whether or not your teams are actively utilizing L&D opportunities to tackle key HR metrics. So feel free to chime in there. Getting results in? Yeah, okay, results are pouring in. Let's take another few seconds there to get those results in. All right, Alex, what are we seeing?
Yeah, so it looks like, actually, let's pull those results back up. Wow, it looks like a lot of people are not actually using L&D programs, which to me is pretty shocking. So I think that sets the stage pretty nicely for what we've got next, some approaches to L&D. So let's keep going.
Oh, Alex, you say shocking. I say not shocking at all. I think that, learning and development is becoming more in vogue, and people are giving it more attention that it really does deserve. It isn't a fad. And so it's never too early and it's never too late for you to start utilizing data and to start implementing learning and development or initiatives at your organization. So once you have these strong programs in place, this is really going to help you tie into better engagement and eventually, hopefully, lower turnover as well. So we're going to be throughout this presentation looking at really 4 key HR metrics that you can use to make informed decisions. And again, this doesn't matter if you have a strong background in learning and development and that's all you do, or if you are in the just a general HR space and L&D is only a part of what you do. So some of the things we're going to be looking at, you see them on the screen. We're going to be looking at how performance ties into L&D, growth and retention, career mobility, and return on investment, that elusive ROI. So we're going to dig each into these things throughout this presentation. Cool. So starting it off with performance, basically, if you link employee performance and employee training, you're going to start seeing gaps in your programs. And you're going to be able to identify where improvements need to be made and what you can do to increase overall performance, and then tie that into your L&D opportunities. And Summer, what do you think on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, Christy. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I think performance is the perfect place to start here. I think what we're seeing in the workplace right now is a lot of uncertainty. We're seeing shifts, organizational shifts. And the ultimate question for the L&D practitioner is, how do I upskill my team faster? How do I prepare them to work across teams? And how can I really prepare my company to go to the next level that I'm envisioning? So this, to me, really speaks to that larger need in L&D to transition some of our outdated design models into more agile best practices.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things to dive in even more there is looking in performance deeper. And I mean, absolutely coming up with these agile best practices are going to help so much. And then to do a little bit of the footwork in looking at your data is take a look at your high performers, take a look at your low performers, and see if you can find a correlation to who's taking advantage of your learning and development opportunities that you currently have in place, or who's maybe asking for learning and development opportunities. I think that you guys may or may not be surprised at some of the correlations that you would find. And that's really going to drive immediately into where you can start making adjustments and start using those agile best practices that we were just talking about. So on that note, if we go on to the next slide, we're going to do another live poll. Alex?
Yeah, no worries. So let's pull that up. I think last time we did not actually share the results, so we want to make sure to do that. You should see on your screen, what do you perceive as the top reason employees stay with a company? Company culture, work-life balance, maybe letting people go early on Fridays, collaborative environment, advancement opportunities, and compensation packages. We're going to pause on this one for about 30 seconds. There's a couple options there, and we want to make sure we get as much input as possible. All right, so you should see on our screen, looks like advancement opportunities are a big reason why people on this webinar are seeing that people don't stay, or they do stay actually. So I think that's like, I mess that up because coercively we see a lot of people, I know data we found at Namely, people leave when they don't see advancement opportunities. So on the flip side, they stay when they see them. So very cool data.
Yeah, definitely data that's backed up by a study that was conducted by the Management Recruiters International, where in the study they did, 72%, you can see there, the longest blue line, 72% of those surveyed noted that career advancement opportunities were the most important factor in choosing a company or leaving a company. And I don't think that's obviously any surprise to any of you. And obviously learning and development opportunities can tie in beautifully into making sure that that is not a factor, or hopefully is not a factor in why the folks are leaving your company, and hopefully a factor in why you're attracting top talent. So we'll talk a little bit more later about career pathing and what long-term career paths can look like a little bit later on in the presentation.
Yeah, so Christy, as we think about this kind of career mobility shift and how our organizations are responding to this, I mean, I'm sure that the buzzword that's on top of all of your minds right now is millennials. And at the risk of kind of devolving into a discussion of generational distinctions, and at the greater risk of just assigning kind of qualitative descriptions to these groups, I think one thing that is a marked change right now that we're noticing, if you've read any of the recent research reports, the Bersin by Deloitte reports, we're noticing that organizations are becoming flatter. So the typical hierarchy that has existed for a very long time is not finding root in the more nimble, agile companies that we're working with now. And I think a lot of the fallout of this means that that individuals are realizing they need to upskill faster in order to ensure their long-term future. So as an employee, I am telling my employer, hey, I realize that you're asking me to do more with less. And I realize that I'm kind of being asked to influence without authority and work across teams. But with that comes the expectation that you're providing me meaningful learning opportunities to promote growth long term.
Yeah, no, I mean, career mobility, this has actually been something that in my world at Namely, we've been talking a lot about in the last couple of weeks. I've got some interesting things happening on my end. But one of the things in talking about career mobility is definitely just, simply put, promoting an opportunity for internal growth. I know we've been referencing studies a lot, and I'm going to reference another one. Culture Amp looked at folks that they were able to look to study, and that 38% of people who left a company, well, they were more likely to feel that there was not a career opportunity for them at the company. So we're just seeing that this data is repeating over and over and over again, and it's obviously a major thing that's going to keep talent where we want them. So a couple things we can do there is looking at lateral movement, right? But something to think about when considering lateral movement as a strategy at your organization is you need to make sure that you've set up a culture where this is accepted and it's encouraged, because you can find that if it's not, employees will be hesitant to apply for other positions. They'll think that it has a negative consequence for the role that they're currently sitting in, and then you're not going to see that career mobility. People are going to think those opportunities don't exist. So be encouraging of it and accepting of it all the time. But what's also important to tie into that, and relates really easily, is to set expectations on when that is going to happen or when that can usually happen. So talk about it. Is this something that at your organization mobility is going to happen yearly, bi-yearly? Is this a continuous thing that's going to happen whenever? Lay that down. And I think one of the best things you can do is to empower your managers with that knowledge. By empowering your manager with that knowledge, you've got boots on the ground that when a career conversation is going to just come up spontaneously and organically, your manager knows how best to respond to that. And everyone knows that, okay, yeah, this is an opportunity that's there. I'm speaking about it. And when somebody is talking about moving around within an organization, unsurprisingly, that's usually going to come along with some understanding of additional knowledge that they should bring to the table. So supporting continuing education within your organization is also paramount. So a couple of things you can do in there from, let's say, a financial standpoint on your side, if your company has that kind of resource, is to do some kind of tuition reimbursements, as well as learning and development stipends. These are really great ways to incentivize people to take programs that are not necessarily offered at your organization. And we'll get into specializations later, but it's really difficult to touch on everything everyone wants to do. So if you can give them that flexibility to go outside of your organization for things, that's going to be really great for them. Employees often don't have those resources on their own, so getting that support from you. But even if your organization doesn't have resources like that to put into tuition reimbursements and L&D stipends, there's a lot of things you can do to get creative. There's a lot of resources out there that you can find, TED Talks, YouTube. I mean, there's so many things out there that come at little or no cost to you or to your employees that you can take advantage of to explore education and really just promote that as continuing learning culture at your organization as well.
Hey, Christy, we just had a great question come in from this discussion around organizations kind of becoming flatter from Gavin. I'd love to field this now before we move on. How does that sound?
Go for it.
Awesome. Gavin, your question was really around curious to know what areas are driving this trend toward flatness in organization. And you postulate it might be breaking down the traditional rule of specialized roles, lower spans of control. This is one of those fascinating areas as I look at different research reports and white papers, and I find that this is coming in two primary buckets. One is this shift in employee tenure and employee expectation of the workplace. So when we know that at the 5-year mark, the majority of Gen X and Gen Y, which are roughly going to be about 75%, only 20% of them are still in a job, in the same job at 5 years. By default, learning and development has got to be more robust in our offering. We need to move towards this quicker time to competency, similar to what Christy's talking about right now. Fueling this career mobility may mean that we're fueling a career mobility that isn't ultimately going to be at our organizations. The second piece I see that's really fueling this shift to flatter organizations, and I'm going to drop some buzzwords here, just a warning, buzzword warning, but they are meaningful words. I think we're seeing a lot of the impact of digital transformation as organizations embrace different business model innovation, as they reinvent themselves. By default, they're becoming more agile. which means they are going to be less hierarchical because they need people to do different things outside of traditional silos. So I love that question and just wanted to flag it before we moved on, but I think it falls in nicely with this career mobility discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kind of similar. We were talking about career growth, but it also ties into your company's growth. And so at Namely, we were able to pull a report with looking at companies who had more than 50 employees at the start of 2016, and then found that the companies that grew faster actually had lower turnover amongst those that had been with the company at the beginning of the year. In fact, we actually found that for every additional 10% in headcount growth, companies' turnover rates were an average of 1.6% lower, which is fascinating. So it's awesome to keep employees interested in staying at your company, looking at what growth is like at the organization, but then how do you tie that into keeping them actually engaged? And Culture Amp also looked at this and said that people who stay with an organization, they're 24% more likely to say, surprising not, that they had access to the learning and development opportunities that they needed. So, and kind of speaking to what Summer was talking about before, if we can make sure that we're tackling that, it's really going to look amazing from our engagement standpoint as well for our employees.
Yeah, I agree, Christy. I think this is a really critical data point you're bringing up from Culture Amp. I mean, what this tells me is our employees have kind of shifted their mindset about what career growth looks like. I would wager to say that in past decades, career growth meant same employer, roles of increasing responsibility, higher salary, better office. But what we're looking at now is individuals wanting to be recognized as individuals, not just individual contributors, and aligning that growth with their own learning, adding skills, adding competencies, and being able to influence in more areas than just their assigned role. That's really interesting that could lead to that retention piece, which is just gold.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I mean, we were talking about roles and how growth is there, and people are seeing that, oh, okay, there's an opportunity for me, but what is that opportunity? What does that roadmap to that opportunity look like? And then you start looking at career planning. And this is something that I've been doing some back-end work right now that hopefully later on this core into, we're almost in quarter two, I guess already. So later into quarter two, we can start rolling out some more of this for even folks here at Namely. So looking at career planning, it's exploring what is everyone interested in? Simple as that. You don't know until you ask somebody, and this is another area. Again, you can empower your managers to know how to have those conversations and also report back to you on what the interests are. And that's going to influence a little bit of what needs to be done in terms of learning and development initiatives at your company. And so again, I'm a really big supporter in how through learning and development opportunities and career planning, you can really bring your managers into this story because they are, as I said before, your boots on the ground who are going to help make this a reality for everyone, including your employees. So one thing that I want to kind of keep in mind is that companies whose mindset is about growth, they're really better equipped with arming their employees for agile learning, and they are meeting their employees' needs in the moment and fostering a learning culture. And then this way everyone knows that I have this career path that I want to set on, and I'm not just told, yeah, it'll happen, maybe in a year, but here's the steps to get there. This is what I'm interested in. This is what I want to do. And then and I'm going to tap on you, Summer, to talk a little bit more about that, is what learning is needed to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you mentioned managers is really the glue here. In my world, I'd say managers provide the meaningful context for learning.
Yeah.
As practitioners, we've got to move away from this false construct that learning is something that happens outside of the job I do or outside of work. We cannot take employees out of their job to go learn fast, and then come back and do your job as you've always done, and somehow make that connection to what happened on that day or out of that context. with microlearning, and of course, I'm the CLO of Grovo. We're the microlearning company. We love this stuff. But I believe microlearning is this strategy that empowers our practitioners to provide targeted learning opportunities to groups in their workflows. And we'll talk a little bit about what that strategy looks like going forward, but it's really aligned with this mindset of exploring interests, setting goals, and designing those learning and action plans. One of the things we found most valuable with our customers is, access to our microlearning library gives them access to what is essential for employee growth. There's been long discussion over the years around, what do employees really need in their workspace? What is a soft skill, quote unquote? I'm using air quotes here as if you guys can see me, but air quotes, soft skills. I call those professional skills. We know that we need people that can work with other people. We know that we need people that can exercise a level of self-awareness. We know that our teams need to be immersed in concepts like inclusion and unconscious bias and leading, influencing without authority. So microlearning is that opportunity to deep dive into those concepts in the workflow. So it really takes root and grows over time.
Yeah, I got to just jump in real quick and say, I think we were joking about this the other day that, we've spoken a little bit about HR buzzwords and learning and development buzzwords. And for the longest time, micro learning was a buzzword. And I've been making the joke around here that, like cool was once slang and micro learning was once a buzzword. This is what it is now. If you're not doing micro learning, learning isn't going to happen as effectively at your organization.
Hey, I won't disagree with you there, Christy. That was well said. So yeah, as we look about microlearning, and you guys have probably seen these stats. These are numbers that we throw around, but we really talk about engagement metrics, right? So for the longest time with learning, we're talking about the investment. We're talking about employees' time. I am concerned with employee engagement. How do we know that they're getting into learning and adopting it as their own and making meaningful change? And that's the engagement we got to talk about. This first stat came from a microlearning overview that ATD ran in 2017. It was a quantitative survey of roughly 564 L&D and HR leaders around the US, and they provided their response to various prompts. The faster to develop, I think you're going to see this value anytime you are able to walk away from how we've always done it. I'm currently studying this a lot, and when I think about kind of ADDIE models, and we love ADDIE, all right? I can almost feel the participant on this call. It's like, don't make fun of ADDIE. We love ADDIE. It's brought us a very, very long way. But from my viewpoint, the days of multi-month architecture over grand learning and development curriculums is over. Our businesses are moving faster than we can build the learning to sustain them. And we have to think smarter and more different. So this faster to develop with microlearning, it's essentially an action of peeling back the layers of all the extra stuff we usually add to learning and getting to the pith. I was just chatting with my director of strategy this morning, and microlearning to me is really a celebration of that pith. What is the value? What is the nugget that we're imparting to our employees? I was in Dallas about a month ago working with a customer out there, and they applied a microlearning strategy to their onboarding, which, onboarding is so sacred, right? It's like this week long of employees in a room, and he called it his stop talking strategy. He said, we finally realized we were just putting these people in this room, and by day 5, they were so zombied out, mind numbed over hundreds of people just talking at them. And they utilized a microlearning approach, a microlearning strategy to get to the pith. What do we really need our people to know? What is that big idea? What is that one idea, that single concept that they need to get through this challenge, this project, this whatever? And then the completion piece, one of the things that I've been most proud of is, we track our data, and this webinar is all around using data to make good L&D decisions, right? It's not just a gut feel anymore. We have access to the data. We need to start using it. So my key performance indicator for my team's success when we create our content is all around learner engagement. And we find that the lessons, microlearning lessons that are assigned, 93% are completed. And conversely, those that are unassigned, this means lessons that learners found themselves, clicked themselves, and decided to, learn something new or develop a growth. Those are 80% completed. And those percentages are good for L&D practitioners. It's like, woohoo! We're seeing people come in and do this. So that's the power of microlearning in my sense. And I'm like dancing all around over here. I'm using my hands when I'm talking, but I'm sure you can hear that. So yeah, the formula that works. Christy and I were talking a lot about this. One of the big focuses of Grovo has been to get to that definition place around microlearning. I think there's always danger in assigning words as solutions when we haven't really defined them, or we haven't done the due diligence to understand what we mean and what they impact. So for us, when we think about microlearning, it's really single concept. It has one learning outcome. For you L&D practitioners out there, think of this as the learning objective. Microlearning should start from that space. My editorial manager has this great phrase, and he always says, it's not the size of the lesson that matters, it's the size of the idea. So when you think about that single concept, what is that critical value that you need your employees to have? And of course, multimodal. I love the heart icon here, namely, folks. We love multimodal, right? It's so often we default to just a PowerPoint that we do our audio voiceover and think it's going to, increase engagement. To give our people what they need, multiple ways to interact and appreciate content. And of course, in context. Been doing a lot of reading on this recently. Those of you that follow Bob Mosier's work, he's been chanting this kind of in the workflow concept, and it's real. And data has allowed us to get here. When I first started in L&D, all of this was a dream. We were kind of before our time, right? We believed that we could create learning in the corporate environment that employees could consume in their workday, but the tech wasn't there. We're there now. We have the data. We just have to use it.
Yeah, no, I'm nerding out a little bit over here as you're explaining all those things, because I myself, I just love making sure that learning follows those kinds of principles you were talking about, learning objectives, and I'm sure all the folks on the call who are learning development folks as well are nerding out alongside me. So, once you have these programs in place, and we're talking about data to know what you're doing, we also need to look back at the data of how well it was done. And this is going back to that first piece that we were talking about earlier of getting your also executive buy-in. Without this, that's probably going to be a little difficult. And so once you know from using data what your employees want and you've executed on that, you also need to make sure that you're taking a look at some other metrics to make sure that, one, it's effective, and two, that you're making continuous improvements where necessary. And so we have a couple examples on the screen that you can look at to see how effective they are and what kind of value they're providing into your organization. Examples like percentage of promotion and lateral movement, basically just looking at how your programs might be influencing career mobility, as we spoke about before. Looking at performance ratings. Are you actually affecting the performance in different organizations? And be creative in that as well. You don't necessarily have to wait for annual reviews. Does your organization have any kind of quarterly check-in? Do you guys have performance ratings? And we also talk about productivity rates in here. Those are things you can also tie in. Looking at employee turnover rates, so making sure that you're retaining your top talent, and look at it at different levels, not just kind of one employee turnover, but look at turnover of managers, turnover of your top performers, turnover of your new employees, turnover of certain amount of tenured employees. So you can actually bring these out and look at them in several different facets. And of course, don't forget your employee survey feedback. So if you're given those annual, quarterly surveys, and of course, don't forget your smile sheets, when you do your training, even if it's in an e-learning, micro-learning format, you can usually embed surveys and whatnot to see what or how people are reacting to them, to know not only, okay, it's productive, but if somebody doesn't like it, you know that it's not going to provide value either. So don't discount your smile sheets. Those are going to be really important as well. And Summer has a really interesting point on here on return on engagement.
Yeah, we were kind of geeking out over this yesterday. The history of L&D, those of you that have been around for a while, at the beginning, it was so admin focused, right? It's so easy for your people to do it. And now we've swung to this other side of learner focus. And I think that shift happened somewhere around the time that we stopped calling it training and development. We started calling it learning and development. It was kind of a top-down change. But I think this concept, this return on engagement concept, has been really important over the last couple of years as we start harnessing the data that we have access to. So our return on investment, when we present to the executive team, when we present to leadership, however we justify our expenditures, should always include the engagement metrics that we discovered through the implementation of this program. And I would encourage you to think about how are you gonna measure engagement? What aspects of that is most critical to you? If you're doing some type of in-person training, are you going to be looking at numbers of signed up, numbers of attended? How are you going to track their engagements in the session? Try to get to a quantitative level here if you can. I think there's validity in those types of data gathering practices, but the return on engagement, I think that is going to keep the learning and the learning tech as we move forward, because ultimately what we're talking about is changing people and helping them become better versions of their employee selves. So I love that concept of ROE, something just to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, it's so important that we don't forget that, we first start thinking about it. Oh yeah, we want to be learner driven. And then once the programs are implemented, we start thinking in business numbers, but we can't forget that we are still delivering to people, right? We're in HR for humans. And so it's important that we, to make sure that they're also engaged, not just with, organization, but with their own learning goals. Something that I kind of want to get some of your thoughts on is as we're seeing a shift in the org, and you spoke a little bit earlier about flatter organizations, roles now are getting more specialized. And so therefore kind of the more traditional approach to learning and development that was once taken of a one size fits all, let me just implement all these different programs that apply to everyone, that's not really working anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I think as practitioners, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Just like we love to geek out over the exciting L&D terms and what's happening in our space, we can often fall victim to over-architecture and spending so much time architecting these far-reaching programs that when deployed are really going to reach X% of the population, or conversely have a negative impact on those that shouldn't be involved in that from the beginning. One of the things that intrigues me about this shift is while we're seeing these roles become more specialized in some aspects, employees are also being asked to informally manage other things that are outside of their typical duties. I guess in the HR world, we'd call this other duties as assigned, right? That one little checkbox on your job description that you're like, well, I guess I got to sign it. It's still listed here. So I'm assuming my boss can tell me I'm managing something else as we go forward. I think what this really speaks to is L&D, one, need to be looking at the data for their company. How do we have people positioned? What are they really managing? And am I keeping tabs on the informal teams that are happening in my organization? We're seeing a lot of that, these rise of teams. So as I kind of specialize the skills of my employees, am I ignoring the informal opportunities to influence them? So while I'm seeing this as kind of this formal structure, what is happening informally that's also driving objectives? And how can I include those people and those groups in learning and development programs that I create?
Yeah, no, I think what's the there's a buzzword around that. Is it cafeteria learning? Is I think one.
Yes.
Cafeteria learners. That's what springs to mind. Something I'm trying to figure out a way of how we can measure and capitalize on that. But you know what's happening, and how you can just encourage that to continue, because kind of going to the other point of the screen, training needs to be more specialized. Whether, as Summer was saying, it's formal or informal, it does need to be more specialized. This can be difficult and it can be daunting when you look at it, but when you collect data and you're looking at all the things we've spoken about today, what are people interested in? When are they interested in it? That's going to immediately inform to you what you're going to do and when. So it seems like this big concept at first, but if you think, oh, I have this smaller group of folks that are interested in this topic, well, maybe I try hosting a smaller workshop more frequently, right, with smaller folks, or implementing micro-learning for those individuals in those areas, rather than just saying, here's just this slate that we've got, and this is what you're going to do. So being able to specialize their training, this is something anyone can do. Whether you own a learning and development function, whether you're working on learning and development initiatives as part of the broader spectrum of your role, by looking at that data, it takes a lot of that confusion off of, well, how do I specialize? Who wants what? You just ask them. So consider doing, I would say, an annual or biannual needs assessment, where you can actually see in metrics, quantitative metrics, metrics, what people are looking for. And again, I know I've said it a couple times, but don't forget to involve your managers in this conversation. Learn from them what people are asking for, and you will be really excited at what you find out.
Awesome. So I love this slide. I think we should always end webinars on this note of, yes, there are things we can do to improve our L&D programs. Even as Christy said, if you are the one-stop shop in your organization, I'm having very visceral flashbacks of my days in L&D management. I worked at a healthcare company, and we were about 1,500 employees, and it was just me. It was just me doing the L&D. But for those of you on the call that sounds familiar, let me encourage you that there is so much you can do. I think that the first step is always to do it smart, because you don't necessarily have the opportunity to go too far down the wrong path. So this agile learning opportunities, I like this icon as well. As I mentioned, I'm super pumped these days about appropriating agile learning technologies into learning and development technologies. And I think one of the ways we can think about this in an actually doing it standpoint is moving away from over architecture. I mentioned this before, but thinking about learning opportunities and programs that you create as iterative. So one of the ways I've been working on this with my team is moving more quickly to an MVP, a minimal viable product that checks the box for what we need it to, meets the needs, and can be deployed to a specific group. Maybe it doesn't have all the final fit and finish. Maybe there are elements that are not done, but you're able to move to a finished product quicker. And then here's the gold. Here's the gold of this message. You're able to deploy it and get feedback from your people that enable you either to complete it or take it to the next level of iteration. I think so often we prioritize polish over impact in L&D, and we're a little hesitant to deploy something that we may have a section that says, hey, what do you guys think should go in this part? Tell us. We haven't quite nailed the last day of this training. What do you think should go here? I have found that to reap tremendous rewards in my past, and I'd encourage you to do the same.
Yeah, I've gotten some of my best ideas from folks that are at my organization, but aren't necessarily in learning and development function, but took our programs and said, well, this is how I think it might be improved. Hey, it was a wonderful idea. So yeah. I really encourage that. I mean, the same thing kind of goes when you go into specializing your training programs, especially if this is a new a new forum for you, you're going to need a lot of feedback on how it's going. Right now at Namely, we're doing what we call an individualized or personalized learning hack. And I took just about 13, 14 folks, sat with them individually, said, what do you want to learn? And we started pulling that together with their managers, of course, wouldn't forget that. And you probably guessed it from hearing me talk all day. And pulling them in and then seeing, okay, let's see if we can deploy this for you so it gets you closer to what your goals are. We're in the middle of that right now, so we're just not on the way. But at the end, and well, actually middle and at the end, I'm checking in with everyone. How's it working? How's it working from the manager standpoint? How did they feel that they were supported in helping folks on their team specialize their learning? And then how did everyone going through that program feel like we were able to tailor something for them by talking first about their career goals, talking first with their managers about what's capable, what their capabilities are currently in certain skill areas, and then saying, here's some recommendations for stuff that are either free, almost free, things we can support you with on the organizational side. So I'm really excited to see how that works out as something, a framework we can roll out to the rest of the organization so everyone can take advantage of specialized training programs. And then part of that is to promote opportunities for internal growth. We were looking first and foremost at what everyone was interested in doing in a broad spectrum. What are their big career aspirations while they're here at the organization, making that really a clear point. And the second part of that was, okay, well then what skills do we need to get there? So those two things really work hand in hand. And I think Summer mentioned this before, but make sure that you're capitalizing on the informal things. So, and tying in learning to on-the-job activities. If somebody's learning how to have difficult conversations and they're talking to a client that day, maybe they have to deliver some news that the client may not like. Well, boom, there they go. They can try and practice something that they were just learning about in a micro-learning format 10 minutes beforehand. So, yeah, I think those two things really tie close together. But a couple last notes on promoting internal growth, just to remember some of the points I made earlier. Set those expectations within your organization of when those things can happen. Are you looking at it on a regular basis? Is this something that can happen more fluidly? And then I think Summer also mentioned before is what are those opportunities going to look like long-term? Are those opportunities going to still be there at your organization in the next couple of years? Are there new opportunities that are going to pop up in the next couple of years? So keep everyone informed on what those things look like, and everyone's going to really appreciate that transparency into knowing what they can and cannot move into, and hopefully what they can. Obviously, that's the point that we want to drive home, what they can move into throughout their time with your organization.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Christy. I think that the implementing of a microlearning strategy is really powerful when you're able to identify those behaviors or skills or skill gaps that you need as a company in order to move forward. It's kind of a forcing function on getting down to the root, identifying the behavior you want your employees to demonstrate, to architect a solution around that, and then to see it through fruition through a microlearning approach, which means going back to what we talked about, you're focusing on that single concept, that multimodal, and deploying that in their workflows. I recently authored a white paper on microlearning strategy that we published, and it's been a very fun activity to talk with our customers around ways that they are seeing this bring value and engagement in their organizations, and getting back to those basics, those essentials. What do my employees need to help either further their career and move my company forward? And that's really what we've been talking about today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for joining the webinar. We've had a lot of great feedback coming in. I think it was a great back and forth discussion. Unlike any other webinar I've been on, honestly, where you guys are kind of lobbing ideas back and forth, I thought it was really, really fantastic. So now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I'd like to jump into a little Q&A. If you have questions or had them throughout the webinar and you want to add them in, please do so. As I mentioned, we will show the SHRM certification after we get through this section. So the first question I'm going to turn to Summer is going to be, how would you suggest utilizing this data in building a case to start an L&D program for a company that does not have the support from upper management currently?
Ooh, okay. I'm having my flashbacks to my early days. So utilizing data, if I ever heard you correct, Alex, it's utilizing data to build support for an L&D program. And are we talking an entire like L&D function or just a program that doesn't have support?
Just a program.
Yeah, a program that doesn't have support. So with all things, if the leadership support isn't there, your trek uphill is going to be a lot harder and a lot longer. So data is going to be your friend. I think historically, L&D business cases have relied on anecdotal information or have relied on people need this statements, which can skew as very kind of emotional slanted. The value of the data is it moves the discussion from this is what you think our company needs to our company needs this because the data show it. And that's the power of this. So I would recommend whatever your program is that you're pitching, do your due diligence, find the case for it in the data. And then the second part is, and here's the storytelling piece, tell that story in a compelling way. So there's two risks to this, especially in the L&D space. One, we do the due diligence around the data. But then when we go to make the case, we kind of reference just a couple percentage points and we don't let the data pave the way for our initiative. Or two, we get so pick and lost in the data. I'll tell you, nobody wants to read through multiple spreadsheets and bar graphs and blah, blah, blah. Be the practitioner you are, tell the story of the data and make your case in a way that they cannot ignore you. That would be my recommendation.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So we just had one come in, and I think this one's really relevant to Christy because I know we have a remote workforce here at Namely. So I want to ask Christy, this one comes from Julia. Thanks for joining, Julia. How would you handle remote training? I manage offices which are located in different cities.
That is near and dear to my heart. We do the same thing. Remote training, and now if we're talking live training, I'm gonna guess if not, e-learning format, since obviously that can be deployed anywhere. But when doing live training, especially if you're doing this simultaneously with folks that are in the room with you in your home office, which is where I assume you are located, you have to pay super special attention to those folks that are on your call. So depending on what webinar service you're using, make sure that you have a list of people's names there and call them out by name. I like to do that all the time, Julia. So make sure that you can bring them in and ask them specific questions and use their names. This is kind of if you've been in L&D a while, that's a kind of a sneaky little trick. When you call somebody and use their name, other folks might think that might come their way as well. And when somebody is remote, especially if they're attending a webinar remotely, it's so easy for them to just go off on the other screen and minimize you. But if you can try to keep them engaged and ask them potentially more questions than you would ask the folks in the room in front of you, or ask them what they think about somebody who just said, answered a question in the room. What do they think about that? Can they elaborate on that more? Really engage them in that conversation. So I think a skilled facilitator can really help you in that. And if that's you, then work on that. I mean, we all kind of start there at some point, by just making sure, again, you have their names, call out their names, ask them specific questions, ask them to weigh in, and make sure that they're not forgotten. It can be easy to just start talking to those folks you can see faces, but it's easy to forget those that are on the call. So those would be kind of my big recommendations. Use their names, ask them questions, ask them to participate.
Thanks, Chrissy. And we see a lot more questions rolling in, specifically around internal advancement opportunities. And I think this one is so big that we could do a follow-up webinar on it, since we saw those alarming statistics both live on the call and on the slides. So I'm going to hold on those because we see a couple questions coming in about softwares and systems. So I think this is actually relevant to jump into two places that you can use for L&D and tracking your HR data. So I'm going to jump ahead to a quick video we have for Namely HR software. That's what Chrissy and myself are from. Namely provides powerful people analytics to help you make smarter decisions about whether it be hiring, firing, attrition, salary history. So let's just get a quick rundown of the Namely platform.
Today, work isn't just about working anymore. It's about building a great company and having a meaningful experience while doing it. That's what Namely helps you do. Namely is a new kind of HR platform, one that keeps your payroll, benefits, and talent management all in one place. But it feels different. It feels human. Here's how. New hires start onboarding online. They complete self-service employee profiles and fill out their I-9s right in Namely. Then they use e-signature to sign their important documents. From there, your employees land right in your company's social news feed. Announcements, work anniversaries, big accomplishments, they start seeing and engaging with their new colleagues in real time. They can also check out your company's org chart to see where everyone fits in. Next, your people enroll in their employee benefits right in Namely. They see deductions in real time, and their benefits elections are automatically sent to carriers. Our technology makes it simple for HR too. Namely is a full-service payroll provider that pulls employee benefit deductions right into payroll. We also handle your reporting, from W-2s and 1099s to your ACA paperwork. And when it comes to filing federal, state, and local taxes, Namely has you covered. Our platform streamlines your administration and compliance, but it does much more than that. Namely empowers your whole company. Every employee can set goals in Namely, and you can manage performance however best fits your culture, from ongoing check-ins to formal review cycles. With Namely, you see progress as employees complete reviews online. You can then analyze all your HR, payroll, and benefits data, like performance ratings and headcount reports. It's reporting that moves your business and your people forward. And take your company on the go with the Namely mobile app. Everyone can post in your newsfeed, schedule time off, and instantly connect with coworkers from their mobile devices. Together, we won't just make your company more productive. We'll create a place where your employees love to work. Namely, HR for humans.
All right, little Namely plug there. As you can see, Namely is very HR holistic. We cover a lot of different bases, but I think what's pertinent to this webinar and why Namely and Grovo are working together is the L&D piece can really be achieved, specifically micro learning can be achieved in the Grovo platform. So let's get a rundown of what Summer was super passionate about and what Grovo can do. Fantastic. Thank you guys all. I want